Gamer7 and welcome back to another video here on the channel. We are continuing some more Sims 4 occult discussions. Basically a little mini-series I have going on where we talk about occults that maybe some people would like to see, some that have been existing in Sims past, and how we would like to see them in The Sims 4. Obviously this is like my sort of thought process on how I would like this particular occult to be portrayed in The Sims 4, but I definitely would like to hear from you guys down in the comments below on what other stuff you would like to see for that occult, or what you would do differently from what I'm about to say in this video. And today we are talking about elves. So, I particularly love elves to a huge extent. One of my favorite games can arguably be characters that are definitely more like elf-like. They're not called elves, obviously, but that would be Legend of Zelda with, like, you know, Link, Zelda, the Hylians. They all have these pointed ears going on, and I think the Sheikah have pointed ears. Yes, they do. Do they have them in... Yeah, all games, they're pointed ears, too. Sometimes the races, they start looking slightly different depending on which game you're playing, so I was like, but yeah, the Hylians and the Sheikah all have pointed ears, and I love them, but I also really like playing elves in, like, Skyrim and things like that, so I really do like the inclusion of elves. But I'm not gonna lie, when it came to the process of, because I actually, like, the previous ones that I did before this, I did witches before I knew that the Realm of Magic game pack was coming, which was a while back ago, because I ended up taking a pretty big break in, like, around the holiday season and into this new year that has started off so ridiculously crazy. And I didn't necessarily intend to, but honestly, I'm sort of glad that I did, because a lot of things were going on in my life, and it was just better. They were good and bad, just better to actually get a hold of things before I really started worrying about YouTube again. But yeah, so the witches back then, and then the werewolves, the zombies, and the fairies, I sort of already had ideas in my head, and I went ahead and made videos for them. I remade my fairy video, but other than that, I didn't actually, I just went off stuff in my head and sort of ideas. With the rest of them, I actually have a book where I wrote down a bunch of little ideas that came to my head as for this occult to maybe translate into the Sims world. I'm not gonna lie, elves was a lot harder than I was thinking they were going to be, because let's be honest, if you look back into the lore of elves and stuff, they're really just better humans. To be really honest, they have one of the most humanish appearances compared to some creatures that are alongside with them, other than, like, vampires. But, like, size-wise, they are taller, but they still... The main thing is the pointed ears. Now, when you start getting into some races, there are some other different ones. Like, there's other characteristics, necessarily physical anyway. But, for the most part, you would have to make them simplified, for one, for a Sims game. Any occult is going to be, in some ways, have to be simplified from the lore and what people have become to know them as. So, can't go full-blown into some of that stuff, but also, just, they don't have as many cons to really pick from necessarily, because, like, they can use powers and abilities, but it's just like they're naturally born with it, and it's not on the scale of, like, what you would expect a fairy or, like, a like a witch or wizard. Like, there's not obvious ways to try to limit it necessarily. So trying to portray elves to where they do stand out, and also still, like, in a realm of maybe believable to bring to the Sims, was a little bit harder than I was expecting. But here we go. One of the main things that I would really like them to do, but I really don't know if they would, is make the elves actually just naturally taller. Now, I'm not a programmer, I don't know how that stuff works, but in my head, just taking, for even all life stages, maybe depending on which life stage affected more than the other life stages, like, I think toddlers you probably shouldn't tweak too much, and same with kids, maybe tweak it a little bit more in toddlers, but not as much as you tweak the rest of them. But make them taller, because in general, basically all elven races are taller than what is typical for like an average height of a human, or in this case, a sim. So definitely would like to see them make them taller. Now, I wish teens in general wasn't as tall as they were, so I almost would like the option of not making the teens much taller either, just because teens are hard to tell apart from adults sometimes. So, but yeah, in general, make the elves taller, so that's like one automatic physical difference that you could see from a regular sim versus an elven sim. And obviously the pointy ears should be, and I don't want it to be look like necessarily the vampire ears. I want them to bring more pointed ear options. Some of them look more like what you see on Link and Zelda, and then some of them similar to a vampire's pointed ear but slightly different. Just giving more options so that, you know, there's still the pointed ear, but there could be different types of pointed ears and stuff like that. So definitely more pointed ear options. Those would obviously be very physical differences that you automatically recognize for an elf. As far as another thing that I would like to see, I would almost like to see like maybe a ability or a chance to sort of pick which elf you're lean more towards. So by that, like, type of elves, though there's quite a few types of elves, but obviously for Sims, if they was to do this, if they were to bring elves and they were to give you the ability to pick more along a type of elf, definitely wouldn't want to get it overcomplicated and go into too many. So I sort of just picked sort of 3 and then a 4th option that would come about potentially. And that is like the dark elf, or what some people call the drow, the high elf, and then a seasonal, which the seasonal basically could wrap up a bunch of other type of elves easily, but that's why I sort of rounded it out. And then the half elf, which is like, you know, half human, half elf, so you don't have all the abilities of an elf, but at the same time you still have some of them. So going straight into that with saying that, I definitely think the half elf should maybe have some of the pros of being an elf, but not all of them. So that would definitely be interesting. There is no, like, half anything. I don't know if they would do that, just because that would require a little extra things. But they sort of, I mean, with the spellcasters, isn't there's like a thing, like, underlying thing that you're like more of a pure spellcaster, like, depending on your heritage and stuff. So I mean, maybe potentially, like, maybe because they have that going on in the background, maybe there's a way to easily do the half elf thing. I definitely would be interested if they did that. But before we get too fully into the half elf, I should probably discuss what some of the pros or some of the things that could go for all elf, no matter what type you pick. I think depending on your type also should change certain things, but get into that in a moment. My brain's sort of all over the place, but definitely, like, you know, the height, but also they do live longer. In some stories, they almost make elves immortal, but for me, I don't think they should be immortal. I just think they should be programmed and made to have a longer lifespan. So if you're someone who sets your lifespan on short, your elves would live like maybe a normal lifespan, and your elves would live what would be typically set for a normal lifespan, but your regular sims and all the other sims are still on short lifespan. And then if you go to normal lifespan, all your sims are on a normal lifespan, but the elves act more like they're on the longer lifespan, and then the longer one, maybe there's a extra longer lifespan. So, you know, like, they live longer but not immortal. So that definitely, because they do technically live longer, no matter which story, whether it's immortal or not, they do always at least live longer than a human. So I definitely think in Sims world they should live longer than a regular sim typically would, unless they're using little potions of life or whatever to try to keep them living longer. But anyway, on normal circumstances, they should live longer than a regular sim. Also, they should also age well. It is a thing that you see a lot of times, that like elves in general. I don't know, I was trying to say elven sim, but I'm like, I'm not actually talking about sims, and right now. I'm actually just talking about elves in general here, but elves in general tend to age really well. So, like, even, like, the elderly elves, I think, should not look as old as, like, the regular Sims. And they also tend to have, like, better metabolisms. Like, it's just known in general, like, elves tend to have this more, I guess, beauty look all the time. Obviously, if you didn't want to go for that look, you don't have to, but I definitely think they should automatically just, like, being that race that they are, they should just not need to worry about exercise and stuff as much as other Sims do, and they don't necessarily show wrinkles and stuff like other Sims do. Sort of like the vampires are resistant to the cold. They don't have to worry about the cold. They're dead, technically. So they don't have to really worry about the cold. They don't feel it. I'm pretty sure a big, huge rainstorm just came outside. Okay, that's strange. Hopefully it's not picking up on my mic any, but, so yeah, so, and also, technically, I've heard in, like, a lot of stories, and also, recently I've started getting into D&D because of my boyfriend, and I've read where, like, I think elves don't technically have to sleep in some ways, and I've seen that and heard that in a few places where they don't necessarily have to sleep. They can, but they don't necessarily have to, and I didn't know that was, I never really thought about that as an ability, but, you know, if we want to also bring in Legend of Zelda, Link runs and runs around Edge on days and days during Breath of the Wild with no sleep. Only really sleeps to fill up his heart, so, maybe we can even bring that into it, but, so yeah. So I definitely think maybe stay energized, so maybe their energy bar, I don't think they should be completely no sleep. I think if you also give, like, some elven abilities, that they definitely should not be able to sleep, like, not have to sleep. So I think their energy bar should go down slowly, like, quite a bit slow compared to regular Sims, but not necessarily not go down at all, but just slower. So, like, they don't have to worry about it as much. Like, maybe they can go 2 days without sleeping, but then they need to eventually sleep because their energy, and maybe, depending on what they do, if they start doing a lot of active stuff, let it go down a little bit faster, but otherwise, if they're just sort of chilling and they're not doing a whole lot, maybe be able to stay awake for 2 days straight. Something like that. It'd be different. I mean, you wouldn't have to worry about going to sleep. I know sometimes when I'm trying to build up skills, I'm like, oh, my Sim's gotta sleep. Oh, my Sim's gotta pee. Oh, my Sim's gotta eat. Obviously, elves are still gonna have to eat and pee, but, you know, I'm just saying, in general, that would, at least the sleep thing would be one less thing that I'd have to worry about. And talking about skills, elves also tend to have, like, sort of a crafting, like, handiness automatically, so I think with certain skills, they should get a boost. So, like, woodworking and painting and, like, craft stuff, they should get maybe a boost to those particular things. And even with, like, doing the different types, if you did the different types, I think, like, a high elf should almost have a skill boost in general, because they're sort of known to be, like, the more better off elves in a way, and things like that, so they're usually quite intelligent, they're quite skillful in all things, so I think maybe they just get an all-skill boost. I also mentioned maybe with the dark type, they tend to, the dark elves or the drow, they tend to do more stuff at night, so maybe give them, like, a night owl type trait where they have, like, just, like, automatically just built into them, where they do skills better at night. So maybe they would even get a double boost to, like, handwork, like woodworking and things like that if they did it at night. But they also are known to be mischief, so that could easily be, like, a con for the drow or the dark elf. The high elf tends to sort of think they are above all, so maybe they have a harder time communicating, but I was sort of thinking that could also be a con for all elves, that they have a harder time building up relationships with other, like, regular Sims, people who are not elves themselves. So other cults and regular Sims, they would have a harder time building up relationships. I don't think they should not have the option to build up a relationship at all, but just make it harder for them to. And maybe with the high elves, even other types of elves, they have a hard time getting along with. So they have a hard time building up relationships with everyone but other high elves. So maybe that could be a thing, because they tend to think they're better than everyone else. And then with the seasonal elves, one of the things that would be cool, but it wouldn't really matter if you didn't have seasons. So that's the only thing. Some of the things that I think about is would work with certain stuff that come from other packs, and obviously not everyone's gonna have every pack. So I do know seasons is one of the first packs people get, so technically the chances of someone having seasons is pretty high. But yeah, the seasonal elves will be immune to weather conditions. Like, they don't get electrocuted, they don't overheat, they don't freeze, because they're seasonal ones. So they're more meant to be able to sort of take the seasons. I also sort of think it'd be cool if, like, certain physical features changed depending on the season. With the seasonal elves, I don't really know how that would work. Again, that would also be if you have seasons. So otherwise, that's probably not a function they would technically do. But I would potentially, if elves did come to it, and even if they didn't give types of elves, I would sort of try to force types of elves. And if I made one to be more of a seasonal type, I would probably change their skin tone or maybe their hair color or something, depending on the season, just for fun. But one thing with the seasonal elves that they could do, even if you didn't have seasons, is maybe do things like they're happier outside. Their gardening skill is one of the ones that is boosted, unlike the other elves. Their gardening skill is not boosted unless it's at night for the dark elf. Something like that, something along those lines, things that work with just the base game. If this was to become in a pack and you did get it. Another thing, when sort of reading into it, they are very in touch with nature, so I think it would be cool that they just automatically, almost like, which trait is it that Sims are more likely to talk to plants and stuff like that? I don't remember which trait it is right off the top of my head, but sort of like they have that trait, but they're not actually have that trait equipped. Just because they're elves, they just naturally sort of actually can carry on conversation with plants, and also with animals. So technically that would be seasons, unless they added other types of animals in with whatever pack they came to, which I might be getting into in a later video. But so yeah, stuff like that, because they are very in touch with nature, and I definitely think the world that they're in definitely should be a very more nature-fied world. And this will actually sort of bring me into something that I mentioned in the last video with fairies, and that is that I think the elves, if they came as an occult, they should be part of this fantasy pack that I'm talking about, that I think would be really nice. And the neighborhood, depending on the world that comes with it, obviously the worlds usually have anywhere from 3 to maybe even 5 neighborhoods, so it's usually somewhere in between there. So have however many neighborhoods with how many other occults that you're adding to it, and the fairies have one section, and now the elves have another section. And I do have one other occult that I did realize that I have written in this book that I'm going to add in with this, that would be the third neighborhood, and mainly have it more of a woodsy, foresty area for the most part for this world, but it'd be slightly different depending on which occult was more known to live in that little section of the neighborhood. So I definitely think there should be a woodland area, but also maybe a lake and stuff like that. A few little different things in the area where the elves are at. Very natureful, but maybe not as strongly magical as the little neighborhood that the fairies are in. So I definitely think that would be really fun if this pack ever did come into existence. I would be so excited. But yeah, and with the elves, give some build and buy that's directly for their area and stuff like that, and maybe even more wood crafting items to come with it. They seem to be with eco living, and now this knitting, what is it, nifty knitting, is that what the stuff pack that's coming out very soon is? Probably is going to be out by the time this video goes live, because the zombie and the fairies video I still haven't published at the point of recording this video, so they still got to go out before this video goes out. So nifty knitting is probably out by now. But yeah, so they seem to be bringing more stuff for you to make, because there's candle making, there's the fabrication, and now there's knitting and making different objects from knitting. So I really think it'd be cool if they added some more woodworking stuff with this one, with the elves part of it, because they are crafters. And maybe even add something else, maybe metal or something, metal making or something like that, because they are very skilled crafty type creatures. And that would be really cool, I think. But we'll just see. I would really... This fantasy pack has been built up so much in my head. I'm almost sure it will never come into existence. But I would love to. And if you would also love to, please share the video and mention it to a bunch of Sims people and the Sims team. And maybe it can happen. Even if you're not as thrilled about their cult, just think about the build and buy objects that could come out of a fantasy pack. It would be great. But anyway, so yeah, that is sort of my thoughts on bringing elves to The Sims. There's probably... talking about I almost forgot to bring back to the half-elves with them. Definitely not having as much power. Maybe they age a little bit more. They don't live quite as long, so it's like... Not, if you're on the short lifespan, it's not as short as a regular Sim, but it's not as long as the elves, so it's like somewhere in between. Stuff like that, so sort of dampen them down so they're not as much like a regular elf, but they're a little bit better than a regular Sim. So, you know, somewhere in between, that is basically what I would say with the half-elf. I feel like the half-elf has a less chance to go in, because with the other occults, there is no in-between. I'm with the aliens, technically they are hybrids, but there's almost no way to tell that they're a hybrid. To me, they almost all seem like full-blown aliens. Because originally aliens wasn't supposed to be able to have hair, but also didn't. Now you can, or at least I can. I don't know if it's one of my mods, but I'm pretty sure anyone can put hair on aliens at this point, because that just wasn't fair. If you want a bald alien, you have a bald alien, but at the same time, we don't know necessarily full-blown what aliens are gonna look like. Who's to say they don't have hair? So there's that, but all the power, like some powers that the aliens have, the hybrids seem to have too. The only thing that's usually the difference is the eyes. They usually have regular Sim eyes, but that's about it. So, but I guess when it comes to mixing them, sometimes that's all you can do. But anyway, so yeah, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please hit that lovely like button, subscribe if you're not already, and make sure you hit the little notification bell so that you're notified when another video does go live. Please let me know about your thoughts down below about elves coming to The Sims. Is there stuff you would change? Is there stuff you would add? Do you like the key points that I'm bringing up? How do you feel about this whole fantasy pack idea? Like I said, there is like other things I want to add to build up to this fantasy pack, and I'm actually going to go ahead and record those two. There's going to be 2 more sections of videos that are sort of going to go along with the idea of the fantasy pack. I'm going to go ahead and record those as the next 2 versus the order I originally was going to do. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do those 2 next, just to round up the whole fantasy pack thing, because I think that would be really cool, and I think these all sort of fit. But anyway, yeah, let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!